Hello everybody, welcome back to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today we're going to be going over the 20 teams that are going to the Montreal Major in Rainbow Six Siege, but instead of giving a general overview of the teams like I did in the previous video, we're going to be ranking them to give you a better idea of what to expect from these teams as far as their performances at the event. So I have a tier list format here, a tier list template. If you want to check it out, it'll be in the description. By default, it comes looking like this, so it's more of a prediction than a power ranking. I changed up my tiers, so you'd be predicting, who you think wins, who's the runner-up, etc., all the way down to 17th through 20th place. You could even separate this because there is a distinction between 19th and 20th place and 17th and 18th place. But anyways, these are the teams. This is the tier list, but again, we're going to be going with the slightly edited version that I made. One more consideration: if you are doing the stock tier list, 17th through 20th, you do need to pick 4 of these teams because a bunch of the teams, 12 of them, are already in phase number 2, therefore they cannot place 17th through 20th. You pick 4 of these teams, and technically there's some combinations of these teams that are not possible for them all to be eliminated or all to qualify, but because it's double elimination, there are a lot of different combinations. Anyways, let's go back to the actual tier list. Okay. And in case you're not familiar with these teams, just by their logos, I'll go down the line really quickly. From Europe, we have BDS, Secret, and Virtus Pro. From Brazil, we have FaZe, Liquid, and W7M. From North America, we have Sonics, Dark Zero, and Space Station. From Japan, we have Scars. From South Korea is D+. From Asia is Elevate. From Europe is G2. From North America is CL4L. From Brazil is Black Dragons. From Japan is Cyclops. From South Korea is Fear X. From Oceania is Chiefs. From Middle East, North Africa is Falcons. And from Latin America is Alpha Team. Okay, let's get started. I think I'm just going to go down the line. Maybe we'll move things around as we go. Kicking it off with BDS, yeah, they're the clear tournament favorites. They were the runners up at the last major, and they were the winners of the last big event, which was Esports World Cup. They absolutely dominated that event. They looked a little bit shaky in Europe, maybe a little bit less good, I guess, than people expected, but they're still the first seed. They were still really solid, and they're still the clear tournament favorites. Then we have Secret, the second seed out of Europe, and they were good. They were pretty clearly the second best team out of Europe. At the very beginning of the stage, it was very unclear where they would be. They weren't looking spectacular, but they really bounced back. They even gave BDS a run for their money throughout the stage, and they ended up in second place. I think they're a solid A tier. And I guess let me quickly say what each of the tiers roughly equates to. Maybe I should have done it before, but let's do it now. S tier, I would expect one of the teams in this tier to be the winner of the event. I would be somewhat surprised if that's not the case. A tier, they're teams that I could also maybe see winning the event. I would be a little bit more surprised, but more likely I would see them like top 8, probably top 4, somewhere around there, potentially in the grand final. B tier, teams I would be pretty surprised to see make it to the grand final. More likely for them to make a good run in Swiss, maybe even crack into the top 8, but probably not go anywhere in that top 8. C tier, these are teams that maybe they'll put up some fights, maybe they'll get the last round of Swiss, but I don't expect a whole lot from them. And then D tier, the teams that I have very minimal expectations for. The teams that I put here, I would expect them to get either 0 or 1 wins at this event, whether they're in phase 2 already or in phase 1. You need 2 wins to make it out of phase number 1. You need 3 wins to make it out of phase number 2. So probably they wouldn't make it to the final round of phase 2 if they're in it. So again, 0 wins or 1 win is my expectation for teams down here. Okay, let's continue on. Virtus Pro, the third seed out of Europe. They sort of got here, maybe not by the skin of their teeth. They didn't have to go through the LCQ, but it was surprising that they made it here. They didn't look great during the stage. They had a few moments. They 7-0'd G2, which is something, and they made it here over Wolves, who didn't even end up making it here. They got put down to the LCQ, and then they got eliminated in that LCQ, even though they were looking like one of the stronger teams in Europe. So I'll put them at B tier. I think that's a pretty fair assessment of where they're at right now. This is one of my favorite teams. This is probably my favorite European team, but I certainly can't say they're the strongest looking team at the moment. Moving on to some of the Brazilian teams, FaZe, they're probably the second tournament favorite after BDS. Some of the players on the team have won a major before, but that was several years ago. And the current iteration of the team, they've gotten pretty close. They were in the SI Grand Finals. They were 1 round away from winning SI for a bunch of different rounds. And yeah, they've choked a few events. Ultimately, they've been one of, if not the event favorite for a bunch of events recently, and they have not quite gotten across the line. This could be the one where they do it though. Then we have Liquid, sort of a similar story to FaZe. They haven't been as good as FaZe in recent years, but maybe they have a longer history of being a good team. The iteration with Volps and maybe even the prior iteration weren't as impressive as some of the others, but the current one looks pretty solid with Maya. They were good in Manchester, they were pretty good at EWC, and I think it's entirely possible we see these guys in the grand final. And then rounding out the top 3 seeds from Brazil, we have W7M. I don't think they're quite S tier. Some people might make that argument, but I think they're fine here in A tier. Maybe we'll reorder the tiers. Perhaps they'll be above Secret. We'll see. But I think they're pretty fine in that A tier. And then we have Sonics, the final team. I think that's going to be in the S tier. So I think it's going to be kind of a close call with the guys that are here and maybe some of the ones I'm about to add. But I think a lot of people see these 4 teams, BDS, FaZe, Liquid, and Sonics, as the 4 frontrunners for this event. Obviously, as I said, BDS the main frontrunner, but any of these guys, maybe any 2 of these guys being in the grand final, depending on how the bracket in top 8 pans out. Sonics, I think a little bit more to prove, because Liquid, they've had their 5 for a little bit now. FaZe have had their 5 for quite some time. BDS have had their 5 for a little bit. But Sonics, they just picked up Canadian. They just picked up Surf. They've had Grixer and Rexon forever. Ambi's been on the team for, I guess, not really that long either. So not only is their team new, but they also have a few fairly inexperienced international players in Ambi, who did play at SI, but that's the only international event he's seen thus far, and then Surf, who's only played at EWC. So a couple of relative newbies compared to the absolute wealth of experience that you see on these top teams. But I think they can still hang with them. They just have a little bit more to prove, given them being a newer team. Then we have Dark Zero, the runner-up by the slimmest of margins in North America. I think this is where I'm going to draw the cutoff. You might even argue that Secret and or W7M could be above them, but I think this is how I'm going to put it. They're maybe the team that's closest to the S tier, but for a few reasons, I'm going to put them here rather than A. One, well, I don't know, S tier is getting a little bit big, so I don't want to have too many teams up there. But 2, I think there's a couple of unknowns. How will Nafe fare as the main IGL for Dark Zero internationally? Obviously, they looked pretty good within North America, only losing a single best of 1 and a single best of 3. But Kobilax, he looked pretty unconvincing in a lot of their games. He did have some pop-off moments, but still, overall, with this being his first international event, I think he has a lot to prove, and I think the team without Canadian also has a lot to prove. And they did prove some of that within North America, but international, the big stage, it's a whole nother game. So I think I'm going to put them tentatively in A tier, but again, I could see them making a really solid run at this event. And then rounding out the top 3 seeds from North America, we have Space Station. I think they deserve A tier as well. They're the kind of team that can lose pretty much any matchup and win pretty much any matchup. I would expect them to be somewhere between top 4 and top 11. Top 11 is the teams that make it at least to the final round of Swiss. They didn't do so well at the last major, but there were some obvious reasons for that we found out after the fact, with Iconic being injured and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, they're a pretty solid team. I don't know if they're quite on par with the top dogs, but maybe this is the event where they prove that they are. We'll have to see. I think A tier is a fine spot for them. And then, yeah, now it's time to round out some of the lower tiers with some of the weaker teams from the weaker regions. So Scars, I think C tier is fine. I don't think they're quite D tier. They've had some decent matches, maybe, and even one decent event overall. I think they're probably not, again, as weak as some of the other APAC teams, but I think I can't really put them anywhere above C tier, so that's where they're going to live. D plus, this is one of the bigger unknowns for me. I'm going to have them in D tier, I think, but they could surprise me. I don't really watch a whole lot of the minor regions, so they could be better than I'm expecting. They did slide in as the first seed from South Korea, and they took that from Talon, and I guess FearX even took the other slot away from Talon, so maybe they'll be better than this, but I would be surprised if they put up better than like a C tier performance. I'm going to have them in D. I could be wrong about this. Let me know if you disagree with this one. Then we have Elevate. And this is a weird one, because if Bleed were here, and that's of course the team that they beat for the qualification, yeah, Bleed probably I'd have up in like at least C tier, if not B tier. So it feels a little bit weird to put them down here, but I think they're really unproven. I think, I don't know, it was just some funkiness that led to Bleed not qualifying. And obviously I still need to give props to Elevate for doing so, but I still see them as one of the weaker teams here, and they are free to prove me wrong. Then we have G2. And I mean, if we're just basing things off their most recent major performance, they got to be down here. They got dead last, but I expect them to do better this time around. I think it's fair to put them in B tier near the other teams from the top regions, right? Then we have CL4L, and I'm a little bit torn. I think I'm putting them in C tier. I think there are arguments to put them in D tier. I fear the lights may end up being too bright. One, this is the only non-tier 1 team at this tier 1 event. This is the first non-tier 1 team to qualify for a tier 1 event in quite some time. None of these guys have ever played in a major or anything like that. Packer and Adam have been on tier 1 teams. Tristan, I sort of incorrectly stated in the previous video that he had 0 T1 experience. He has subbed in, to be fair, but it's just a very minimal amount of somewhat fake experience. Any game with a sub is sort of less competitive than normal games. Yeah, I think they're a solid team. They're from a solid region. They beat a lot of tier 1 North American teams, but the lack of experience and the sort of last minute nature of their qualification, obviously all the teams coming in from LCQs were last minute, but I think of all the teams to qualify that way, they had to be the team that was least expecting to do so. I'll have them in C tier because I think they're solid, but I think a lot of external factors could lead them to having a pretty poor performance, potentially. And then we have Black Dragons. I think I'll put them up here in B. They have a lot to prove. Only one of their players has played at an international event before being asked former player for Team Liquid. They did qualify over Furia. That's no small accomplishment to end the lengthy qualification streak that team had going. One of the greatest teams of all time, maybe even the greatest, depending on your assessment. But I think I'm gonna have them in B tier. I don't think I'm ready to put them quite up here, but they could prove me wrong. Cyclops, yeah, sorry guys. I think you're gonna be down here. They did make it out of stage 1 last time around. I'm not convinced that'll happen again. I definitely see them as one of the weaker teams at the event. So in D tier they go. Tier X, pretty similar story. They did eliminate G2. So, they had an okay showing at the previous major, especially considering the expectations. But for whatever reason, I don't think that's really changed my expectations of them. I still think more likely than not, they will get eliminated in phase number 1. So they'll go down here. Chiefs is another really hard one for me to assess. I guess I'll put them in C tier. They really shook things up because former Bliss, now Gaming Gladiators, I've been calling them Bliss, sort of forgetting that they had changed orgs. These guys took the spot from them. Oda was dropped from, I guess, current Gaming Gladiators, joined this team with Tex and Jigsaw and a few other people, and they took the spot away from Gaming Gladiators that they were locked in for quite some time. It did feel like Oceania was a pretty well one-team region. This team came about and shook that up, and I guess I'll put them here in C. In my mind, I feel like they're a little bit better than these guys. I guess they have much fewer reps than a lot of these guys, being just a sort of newly formed team, but they have some solid players, and they did pull something off that I find pretty impressive. So I'll put them in C. Could be wrong about this one. And Falcons, I think, and I could be wrong about this one as well, again, not having watched the minor regions a whole ton, I see them as a little bit better than the weaker teams from the other minor regions. Maybe they're not up there with, well, it's hard to call because Bliss and Bleed/Gaming Gladiators, I think, were definitely thought of as the 2 best teams from outside of the major regions, and maybe Talon, depending on how you look at things. But I think I'm going to put them here, I guess. And then this is an easy one to round things out. Yeah, these guys got to be dead last. Alpha team. They took the spot away from Cruelty. Good for them. Cruelty had been at several events, but Cruelty was bad at all those events. So taking their spot isn't the most meaningful thing. So let's take a quick look. Do we want to move any of these teams around within the tiers? I think S tier looks good. A tier, I think this looks fine. Maybe you switch these two would be my biggest thing. Maybe you even think W7M should be a little bit higher. Honestly, I think all 3 of these feel sort of interchangeable. I like the order they're in though currently. And I don't know, I'll go with this. Then in B tier, yeah, this looks fine. I guess G2 in a sense could be above Virtus Pro. There is a reason Virtus Pro is a higher seed than G2, and in the head-to-head, Virtus Pro smoked G2, so I guess we'll call this good enough. Scars, CL4L, yeah, maybe I'd swap these 2 around, Chiefs and Falcons, and then in this tier, maybe I'll go with, yeah, I think this looks fine. So yeah, if you have your own tier list, feel free to share it. And yeah, if you think anything else looks outrageous here, feel free to let me know. I will catch you guys next time.